Good afternoon, everyone. Boa tarde, boa noite para aqueles que nos acompanham um pouco mais longe em Portugal continental e na região autónoma dos Açores. Para aqueles que nos acompanham aqui nos Estados Unidos da América, em ambas as costas, ainda boa tarde. E para aqueles que nos acompanham no arquipélago do Havaí, portanto, bom dia. Portanto, em nome do Instituto Português Além Fronteiras, on behalf of Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, welcome each and every one of you. We're going to, of course, be doing this bilingual, so I'll switch back and forth to both languages that we use. I'll try not to repeat myself because I know most of you can understand both languages, but also those following us, welcome to those following us on here on the Zoom platform, but also following us on Facebook Live. And of course, the event will be recorded to be archived as part of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute Oral History Archive at the Henry Madden Library at California State University of Fresno. É com imenso gosto que dou as boas-vindas a todos aqueles que estão conosco desde Portugal, da região autónoma dos Açores, ambas as costas dos Estados Unidos da América, esta celebração, esta comemoração do Dia Mundial da Poesia. Muito obrigado aos alunos que também estão aqui presentes da Universidade, do curso de Português, e àqueles que nos acompanham através das várias plataformas, particularmente no Facebook Live. Muito obrigado a cerca de 20 e poucos grupos que se prontificaram para também, portanto, partilhar este evento. It is a pleasure to do this in both languages that I work with and that I love, the language of my birth and the language of my profession, although my profession is teaching Portuguese, but sometimes I have to put in a word of English here and there, as Professor Manuela Marujo knows, although we try to do everything in Portuguese in our classes as much as possible, but it doesn't always work as well as we want to. However, it is, of course, the language of my birth and the language I was raised up until I was 10, and English is, of course, the language that I now communicate in most of the time, and it's the language that I enjoy actually translating poetry from that language to Portuguese or back and forth. So it's both languages that I have had the opportunity to work with. I want to thank all of the poets from both sides of the Atlantic, some good friends who said yes to this event. I appreciate it. I know that you're all busy, and I know that you're all have lots of commitments, especially today. So just a little bit, World Poetry Day celebrates, according to the UNESCO, one of humanity's most treasured forms of cultural and linguistic expression and identity, which is, of course, poetry, practiced throughout history in every culture and on every continent. Poetry speaks to our common humanity and our shared values, transforming the simplest of poems into a powerful catalyst for dialogue and for peace. And do we ever need peace? So as all of you know, UNESCO first adopted the 21st of March as World Poetry Day during its 30th General Conference in Paris in 1999, with the aim, and I quote, of supporting linguistic diversity through poetic expression and increasing the opportunity for endangered languages to be heard. World Poetry Day is the occasion to honor poets, revive oral traditions of poetry recitals, promote the readings, promote writing and the teaching of poetry, and fostering the convergence between poetry and other arts such as theater, dance, music, painting, and raise the visibility of poetry in the media. I think we'd have all a much better world if there was a lot of more poetry in the media and a lot less of what the media does. A little bit of an editorial there. So, again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Muito obrigado. Eu não vou repetir em português porque todos, como eu disse, percebem, mas, portanto, é uma honra ter-vos aqui, particularmente aqueles que irão partilhar em língua portuguesa, vindos da região autónoma dos Açores e de Portugal continental. O dia 21, Dia Mundial da Poesia, decretado pelas Nações Unidas, foi precisamente em 1999, em Paris. E, portanto, estamos há 23 anos a celebrar o Dia Mundial da Poesia, que tem por um dos objetivos, obviamente, dar visibilidade à poesia e, ao mesmo tempo, trazer um pouco de paz ao mundo nos dias de hoje o mundo de facto precisa de paz. Vamos então começar. A ordem é a ordem alfabética, portanto, consoante o primeiro nome da pessoa, porque eu obviamente não iria fazer essa escolha, quem é que vai primeiro ou quem é que vai segundo. Normalmente é uma escolha arbitrária que faço nestes eventos, mas eu pensei que a forma mais justa seria de fazer por ordem alfabética e obviamente usamos mais o nosso primeiro nome em Portugal do que usamos o segundo e portanto eu, ao contrário do que os americanos fazem, portanto será por ordem alfabética, mas do primeiro nome. So we will do this as I mentioned before we went live. Alphabetical order by first name, which is a Portuguese tradition to do it by first name. So it's alphabetical order by the first name. And so number one, and I may be off a letter here or two. So as far as the second letter, I'm not off when it comes to A, B, and C, but then when it goes to A-N or A-B or whatever, it may be a little bit off. But first one is Alberto Pareda, and Alberto is coming to us from Portugal, from mainland Portugal. Alberto is a unique voice in the Portuguese poetry, someone who I had the fortune of discovering in the summer of last year. One of the great things of being in a literary prize jury, amongst many headaches that I had, was of course was discovering Alberto Pareda. And so it's a pleasure to have him. Como eu disse, é um prazer ter o Alberto vindo desde Portugal continental. Como estava a dizer em inglês, descobri o Alberto o ano passado, talvez tarde demais, mas nunca é tarde para se escrever a boa poesia, e foi graças, portanto, a estar no júri do Prémio Natália Correia, e obviamente que desde então estou encantado com a poesia de Alberto Pareda, inclusivamente já traduzi um livro, estamos à procura de uma editora. Alberto, muito boa tarde, bem-vindo.
Boa tarde. Hello, everyone. I am the Portuguese writer Alberto Pereira. I was born in Lisbon. I'm a member of the Portuguese Pen Club. I have 10 books published, 9 of poetry and 1 of short stories. Some of my poems have been translated into Spanish, French, and English, and published in Brazil, Spain, Mexico, Peru, and Switzerland. I have won a few prizes. In 2021, I received an honorable mention in the Natália Correia International Poetry Prize with the book Ecocardiodrama. It will be published this year. I want to thank Denise Borges for inviting me to celebrate the World Poetry Day with the Portuguese community living in the United States, and for his translation of my last book, Neve Interior, Winter Snow. We are looking for a publisher, maybe today. I will read 2 poems, one from the book Neve Interior and the other from the book Ecocardiodrama. Thank you all. Vou agora falar em português. Pronto, como alguns de vocês me conhecem, então chamo-me Alberto Pereira, nasci em Lisboa, sou membro do Pen Club Português, tenho 10 livros publicados, 9 de poesia e 1 de contos. Há um dos livros que me deu especial gosto, que não está bem publicado, foi publicado no Cosmos, e eu passo a explicar. No âmbito do Acrux, foi um festival que aconteceu este ano no Estreito de Magalhães, em Ponta Arenas, no Chile. Houve dois grupos, um espanhol e um chileno, que tiveram durante 13 meses uma plataforma aberta onde se podiam colocar frases até 70 caracteres. E eu decidi, dentro desse âmbito, fazer 106 entradas e construí um livro bilingue, em português e espanhol, a que chamei Aforismos a 600 anos-luz. E isto é engraçado porque no dia 31 de janeiro, de Punta Arenas, todas essas frases foram transformadas num algoritmo e posteriormente em ondas de rádio que foram enviadas para o satélite e que posteriormente foram enviadas para a nebulosa Saco de Carvão no hemisfério sul. E então o livro, entre aspas, está a viajar, essas palavras estão a viajar no cosmos durante 6 séculos e está previsto chegarem à nebulosa Saco de Carvão em 2622. Gostava de partilhar, isso foi feito através de um braço robótico, essa transformação em ondas de rádio, e acho um projeto muito, muito engraçado. Como disse, em inglês tenho poemas traduzidos em espanhol, francês e inglês e publicados no Brasil. Aliás, no Brasil sai esta semana um livro meu que se chama Viagem à Demência dos Pássaros. Foi publicado em Portugal em 2017 e que recebeu uma menção honrosa no Prémio Internacional Glória de Santana em 2018 e agora vai sair no Brasil dia 30, uma versão mesmo em português do Brasil. Publiquei também no México, no Peru, na Suíça, em Espanha e pronto. Quero também agradecer ao Dinis Borges o convite para estar com a comunidade portuguesa radicada nos Estados Unidos e quero agradecer a tradução que fez do meu livro Neve Interior e, como ele disse, procuramos um editor nos Estados Unidos que tenha uma boa distribuição depois de todo o trabalho que ele teve. Eu vou ler 2 poemas. O primeiro poema é do livro Neve Interior e é um poema que fala de uma situação atual, a propósito também da barbárie que se passa na Ucrânia neste momento. É um poema que fala dos refugiados e do início deste turbulento novo século XXI, não é? E o segundo poema é então, que o Dinis conhece bem porque foi júri do concurso, é o primeiro poema do livro Ecocardiodrama, que foi o livro que esteve a concurso e ganhou a menção honrosa no Prémio Natália Correia e que fala sobre a eutanásia. E vou passar a ler os 2 poemas, está bem? Não sei se quer dizer alguma coisa antes de eu ler os poemas.
Não, está ótimo, obrigado.
Ok. Então, do livro Neve Interior, vou ler o poema 36, que agora já está traduzido em inglês, não é? Vou começar então. Vivo no batimento cardíaco de uma gaiola de refugiados. O novo século anunciava filigrana, gargantas sem alçapão, altruísmo de medula intacta. Citava-se a amnésia das fronteiras, a livre circulação de candelabros na utopia e mentes capazes de respirar esculturas de Rodin. Atravesso a Europa vestida de arame farpado. Passo os meses à espera que o estio me dê um autógrafo. Vivemos tempos de goia na boca, não pelo tráfico do deslumbramento, mas pela imagem sombria pendurada no palato. O terror sempre deu braçadas largas. Somos o lapso que nunca atinge o degelo. Obrigado. E o segundo poema é então do livro que vai ser publicado em setembro em Portugal, do livro Ecocardiodrama, e é um poema sobre a eutanásia, que eu gosto muito. Este poema é uma basílica rasurada. Nele repousa uma mulher com o açafrão mordido pelo frio. A esta hora, há versos na proximidade do cipreste. No feminino espaço, respiram uma filosofia de orquídeas desmanteladas e ainda a delinquência de um piano que se extraviou das fábulas. Neste poema vivem homens com batas cor de neve, rastreiam o lodo das constelações e decretam: a eutanásia é o sagrado em contramão. Neste poema entra agora um filho, lê a geada no arquipélago maternal. A pele já não é uma dinastia de bosques que ao toque uiva à pulsação das metáforas. Vou continuar. Este poema quer caminhar para uma idade em que fluía nas veias o design de Elsinore, e se alguém dizia Prozac, não sabíamos que era um gato para lamber o ambismo. Neste poema há uma mulher que implora pelo ritual da foice e o filho estabelece: o corpo é violino para desativar. Neste poema o ciclone tem ensaio, porque o Estado se julga candeia, que lê com exatidão a adolescência do escuro. A mulher, primavera de cores crucificadas. Neste poema é noite, e há um filho que reza obsessivamente. És a biografia onde a lâmina limpa os pés. Muito obrigado a todos.
Extraordinário.
Thank you all.
Não
Muito
haja
obrigado.
dúvida. Muito obrigado, Alberto. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
As I said in Portuguese, extraordinary, and it was easy to, when we read this, to fall in love with the poetry of Alberto Pareda, and to just say, wow. And it really does need to be translated to English. As he said, one of his books is, this is of his new book, the second one, the first book, Henderson, in English, and hopefully we'll find a publisher soon. As I said, we were going to go out alphabetical order, but mixing in, I should have said the second part, mixing into Portuguese and in English, so it's just not all one language and all another language. So, but it will be in that aspect. So, portanto, vamos continuar em ordem alfabética, mas vamos meter português e inglês. Portanto, em ordem alfabética, from those who are going to read in English, the first one is L, so it's Lara Goulart, and so we will turn over to our poet laureates. Briefly in Portuguese, Lara portanto, a escritora há vários anos. A Lara tem publicado em várias revistas e publicou um livro muito bonito, Kissing the Bee, e neste momento acaba de publicar um outro livro que será lançado em breve, e tem poesia extraordinária. É neste momento também, portanto, a poeta laureada pelo condado no Eldorado, aqui no estado da Califórnia. Lara, you're on. Thank you so much for joining us again. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you, and thank you for introducing me. I was glad I didn't have to. I have two poems, and this first poem, well, two of the poems are from my new book, which is called Fourth World Woman.
Show it to us there a little bit more.
There it is. That's what it looks like. And it's got a wonderful picture in the front, our piece of art from a friend, an artist friend who is in El Dorado County, and she did the cover for me. And her name is Pamela Findleton. This first poem is one that I wrote when I was on Flores Island, the island of my maternal grandfather. And I wish I could go back to the Azores sometime soon, but it might be later the way the world is. At any rate, this poem was written in writer's residency at Flores Island. It's called The Crossing. All those years muddled inside herself till her fear vanishes. She lies suspended in the dark between wakefulness and dream, where she begins to understand how near life is to death, how everything sooner or later crosses over. A prayer warms her mouth. Birds fly across the sky of her mirror. Her shadow wanders the room. She used to think her house had a ghost. Footsteps on the stairs, the creaking door. The ghost was her, the imagined shadow of herself. In the morning, what dream? She endured the night. She steps back out of herself and sees where her footprints turn and walk the other way. This last poem is called Fourth World Woman, and it is the name of my book, Fourth World Woman. A fugitive of the modern world, she's tired of deep lies and anthems, the marble limbs of statues on the ground. When smoky skies erase mountains and eagles, shroud angry riots in town, she craves the peace of forest creatures. Imagining a fourth world, the rustle of wild grass beguiles her. The animal inside teaches her to have visions, to watch for signs. Night moves through her, breathes and stretches, a cold nose touching her. She snatches the mouse from the cat's mouth, sets it free. Antlers shadow the sky, and she hurts a beautiful pain. She molts her former selves for a furred face, nostrils slanting. At the crest, she stands doe-like, hooves in place, awaits the deluge to cleanse the ailing earth. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful as always. It's a wonderful poem. The book is magnificent. I encourage all of you, if you have not had a chance to get it, please, and read it. Actually, Lara has received a very, very nice comment that is on her Facebook page. You can see it from Catherine Vash, who I think indeed nailed it, as Lara put it. Very well written. And so, Lara, congratulations again. Thank you for all your work. And we need to have a Cagajo colloquium in the Azores, maybe in a year, after all of the after we can get back to some sense of new normality. Either that, or we just all hitch a ride from Scott, if you'll allow us to go with him. So maybe he can take us as a carry-on, right, Scott? Yeah. So from Lara, thank you again. Congratulations, Lara. Thank you for all your work. By order here, we had a seguir em português a Ângela, mas eu vou pedir à Ângela o favor para a Deca ir primeiro, porque ela tem que levar a filha para o aeroporto.
Sim.
E, portanto,
Claro que sim.
obrigado. Portanto, então passamos para a Deca. Onde é que está a Deca? Está ali. Estás em silêncio, se puderes ligar o som, Deca.
Já não estou.
Já não estás. Estás aí num ambiente formidável na rua.
Eu estou na Praia da Vitória, Diniz.
Na minha terra. Ai,
Yes.
que saudades. Portanto, Deca I'm going to say just a few words in English. Deca will be reading, of course, in Portuguese, and she will be reading two poems, one from herself. She has a book that she published a few years ago, and one from her late husband and good friend of mine, and of all of us, Marcolino Candeias, who's just recently, the Azorian Cultural Institute, published his entire works, just presented by writer Joel Neto a couple of days ago in the city of Angra do Heroísmo. Deca, muito obrigado por teres aceito este convite. Sei que estás em viagem, mas agradecemos muito. Então, um poema teu e um poema do Marcolino, por favor.
Sim, senhor. A senhora que manda. Boa tarde ou boa noite, eu não sei os fusos, a todos. Muito obrigada pelo convite. Aproveito para agradecer aqui pessoalmente o prefácio que o Diniz fez para a Poesia Reunida do Marcolino. E dizer para vocês que a apresentação foi linda. O Joel Neto fez um belíssimo trabalho de análise não só da obra do Marcolino, mas da pessoa que ele era. E então, vou começar com um poemazinho meu, que deu título ao livro, que é Rio Virando Mar, e diz assim, o título do poema é Poeta. Ser poeta é quase deixar de ser, é se diluir para pertencer, é o gozo do aperto do leito das palavras, das grafias e do divino ritmo. Ser poeta é ser rio virando mar. No dia da apresentação do livro do Marcolino, uma das constantes foi que uma das marcas mais importantes da poesia dele era a busca pela justiça social e da importância que os artistas têm nessa luta sempre contínua. Então, eu escolhi um dos poemas que, para mim, mais significa isso, que é o Chico Veríssimo, Até Mais. Em memória do assalariado agrícola que nunca, por vocação, quiseste, do exímio tratador de vinha que, por teus dotes, foste, do hábil dissecador de cabritos, por saber que possuíste, do meu velho grande democrata, íntegro e sereno, resistente contra o fascismo. Chico Veríssimo, Até Mais. Amigo coevo de meu pai, meu camarada de brincadeira pensante, de usar o miolo, teus 60 e tal, nunca ganhavam pés de galinha lá nos olhos da alma. Estavas sempre fresco. Abríamos 4 covetas no céu à nossa volta e tirávamos do bolso nossos pensamentos mais carregados de poesia para o jogo. Tu sabias medir um palmo adiante do nariz. Ousavas violar a mediocridade e sonhar com todas as tuas forças para além das tuas posses, brandindo a liberdade a que tinhas direito, cortando os tendões do terror com tua navalha de enxertia. Chegavas sempre arfando locomotiva velha, carregando um formigueiro em vagões de poesia inúmera, prendias a tarde amena e eu assidia com prazer, no caso do Delgado na Grande Guerra, depois eram os ingleses, os aliados, o afundamento do couraçado Bismarck. E dissecavas o cabrito com mãos inteligentes de muita anatomia. A folhas tantas dizias que tinhas sempre qualquer doce rebuçado, feito não sei de quê, sempre nova quadra popular que desembrulhavas do calor do teu entusiasmo para regalar meus ouvidos e a nossa sensibilidade irmã. Em seguida, conspirávamos uma vez ainda sobre a pele do cabrito ensanguentado, o íntimo, o comum privilégio de esfandangar a velha tarântula de camisa verde. Camarada, meu velho, apontado, resistente, leitor clandestino de jornal maldito, democrata bonachão, emurchecido, mas jamais vencido. E agora, Chico, o que foi isso, esta volta de tudo se acabar? Não quero crer que te tenhas ido embora, sem me visitares com a tua última ponderada filosofia, sem me entoares a última 10ª antiga recordada, em retalhos, já quase esquecida. Não posso crer, amigo. Quando me disseram, atirei os braços ao ar de desalento. E as mãos, Chico, onde as vou eu botar com este vento? Ai, ai.
Lindo. Ai,
Ai. Fico tão comovida porque esse poema ainda é tão necessário. E acho que cada vez mais.
É na realidade. Muito obrigado, Zeca. Muito obrigado.
Olha, obrigada e obrigada, Ângela.
Obrigado, muito obrigado Na realidade,
Ok, eu tenho que começar.
eu e o Marcolino tínhamos, ainda temos uma relação especial. A gente chateava-se um ao outro quase todos os dias, a ver qual é que ficava mais velho antes do tempo. Portanto, um abraço, Deca, a minha Younger Sister. Até breve. E obrigado, Ângela, mais uma vez por permitir. Eu, portanto, de seguida, depois vamos, então, mais uma vez em ordem alfabética, we'll go now to English, and again, the alphabetical order will go to Nancy Vieira Couto.
Okay.
There we are. Thank you.
Now I'm unmuted.
Welcome, Nancy. And just real quick, para aqueles que falam em português, just real quick, Nancy, portanto, é de descendência açoriana e vive na costa leste dos Estados Unidos da América e tem publicado poesia ao longo dos vários anos. E vai ler, obviamente, em inglês.
Okay, I'm going to read two poems. Both of them are set in either in or near New Bedford, Massachusetts, where I was born. The poems take place in different centuries, and neither of them is in this century. The first poem is set in Fall River. In a long time ago, I wrote a poem about Lizzie Borden, and it's in my first book. And I felt like writing about Lizzie Borden again for some reason. The poem is called 92 2nd Street Revisits Her History. 92 2nd Street is the address of the house where the Borden murders took place in the late 19th century. And it is now, it has been through different owners, and at one time there was a print shop attached, and it has been for the last several years a B&B, so that people can actually sleep in the room where Mrs. Borden was murdered, which if people enjoy doing that sort of thing, they can do it. And they can look at the couch where Mr. Borden was murdered. The address is different now, in case you're interested in booking a room in the B&B. At one point, the city of Fall River renumbered all the houses on that street, and maybe other streets too. So I don't remember what the address is now, but at the time of the murder, it was 92 2nd Street. And there's an epigraph, and usually I take my epigraphs from other poets' poems, but this time, since I had written a poem about Lizzie Borden, I took the epigraph from my poem. The epigraph is, at the trial, witnesses layer their stories like transparencies. 92 2nd Street revisits her history. Oh, one more thing. The poem is in the voice of the house where it happened. 92 2nd Street revisits her history. Everyone wants the usual reenactment, but this year, the new owners plan to mark the anniversary with entertainments more paranormal than historical. I have no say in this, although I saw what happened, all of it. Who went down street and who stayed home, who washed and dried the windows, who went upstairs, down cellar to the barn to look for lead for sinkers, who lurked out front, leaning against the fence, who threw up. Handkerchiefs were ironed, locks and bolts were locked and bolted, key left on the mantelpiece, and everyone's sick. Of course I know who did it. The owners think they own me, having paid for walls and floorboards, doors and clapboards, and a barn. They dismantled the attached print shop, purchased wallpaper and paint, and recreated the furniture. They scrubbed and dressed me, dolled me up. I am admired by weekend guests who come to gather tales of shampoo bottles leaping to the floor and ghostly whispers whooshing through the vents. Fungible souvenirs, a currency to dine out on. That's what they paid for, isn't it? My walls were scrubbed and papered, but I still flinch from each remembered splash of blood, pressed hot against my history, the smell of it, metal turned to rust after a moment of blossom, petals blown inside out, the world blown inside out, the gash that split yesterday from tomorrow. I know who did it, but my knowing doesn't damp their oscillations of delight. About suffering, poets teach us that the world goes on and that it's not so bad if it isn't you. Of course, I don't begrudge the guests their few frissons within the safety of this curated space. Cellar to attic, I attract all the phlegmy indicia of the human condition. But I am not human. I know who did it, have no mouth, and keep my peace. And now for something completely different, maybe a happier tone. When I was a child, the city of New Bedford would flood the lawn, the grass, I guess it was a field more than a lawn, in front of the old poor farm. And then it would freeze and it would be a place where children could ice skate and safely with no danger of the ice cracking and them falling into the water. And earlier this year, I was watching the Winter Olympics and got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch the women's figure skating finale, the free skate, and saw some wonderful skating and a lot of tears and a lot of drama. And I was thinking about my first experiences on ice skates. And in those days, you could buy, for children, you could buy these ice skates called double runners that had 2 blades, sort of like training wheels on a bicycle, I guess, except there were no wheels. And they would screw onto your shoes with a skate key like roller skates, so that it wasn't like a huge investment and you didn't really have to know what you were doing. And I wrote a poem about that, and I can guarantee that there's no fantastic skating and no drama and no tears in it. Double runners at the poor farm. All I wanted was to not fall down. I was a bundle of snowsuit, a novice, unsteady on the ice, where clumps of grass asserted through the surface, something to trip on. With double blades, I glided a straight line and then got brave, maneuvered counterclockwise. It was cold. There was no warming house, no place to pee. Not deep enough to drown, my mother said. That city flooded lawn at the old poor farm was magically made ice. They called it Victory Park. We would practice on wobbly ankles. No one came to win. No one knew how to jump or flip or spin or etch a figure 8. There was no kiss and cry. And now, on paper smooth as glass, I skate unsteady with a fine-nibbed pen. I guess you'd say we were a warm-up group. Our movements, the most basic of compulsory figures, lines and circles, low on technical elements. But in our heads, each step sequence led to some amazing free skate with triple toe loops and a double axel, double sonnet, quadruple flip, double play, triple sulcow, or a lay back spin. Not easy, never mind the level, to challenge gravity with a loop or leap or pen. Around my neck, I wore a skate key. Of course, that day, I hit the grass and fell. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful, both of them, wonderful, and thank you. Thank you so much. Nancy Vieira Couto, portanto, poeta que, como ele disse, foi criada na zona de New Bedford, na zona de Massachusetts, e vive agora em Nova York. From Nancy, we will go now back to the Portuguese language. And again, to thank, of course, for allowing Deca to go first, Angela Almeida, good friend from the wonderful island of São Miguel. Angela, estás em silêncio, estás em mute, tens que ligar. But originally from the island of Fayal. So Angela lives in São Miguel, but she's originally from the island of Fayal, a poet who has been writing poetry for a few years, quite a few years, and that's because she started very, very young. And so, Angela has a wonderful book that I've just finished actually translating, Calligrafia dos Pássaros, the Calligraphy of Birds, which is just an awesome collection of poetry. Actually, Scott has one of the poems translated and published in his new book, Wine Dark Sea. So it is with great pleasure that we have our good friend Angela Almeida from the archipelago of the Azores. Angela, muito obrigado, bem-vinda.
Obrigada, Denise, e grande abraço deste lado do Atlântico. E começo por pedir desculpa por ter entrado 5 ou 6 minutos atrasada. Vim da terceira e foi assim um dia todo.
Estás desculpada. Podias chegar meia hora atrasada se vieste a terceira. A Terra Santa. Estás mais do que desculpada. Portanto, se tivesses dito que tínhamos vindo do outro lado de São Miguel, a história era outra. Mas, portanto, da terceira não há problema.
Obrigada, Denise. Muitos parabéns pela atividade que tens desenvolvido a nível científico e ao qual tens estendido esta promoção da nossa poesia, da nossa literatura, e que de facto tem sido essencial, e quero agradecer-te muito, não sei como exprimir a honra que me dá de facto ter o meu livro Caligrafia dos Pássaros traduzido por ti, e pronto, devido ao teu mérito, naturalmente, e agradecer-te muito todo o trabalho que tiveste, naturalmente também, e agradecer ao Scott ter incluído, portanto, um poema meu desse livro no seu Dark and the Sea, não é?
Wine Dark Sea.
Wine Dark Sea, que eu espero ter e ler muito brevemente, de maneira que, sem perder mais tempo, eu vou ler 2 poemas. O primeiro é de Caligrafia dos Pássaros e é assim: interrogo-me sobre os silêncios matinais do campo, tanto medo na fronteira do alívio, o resgate da boca encostado ao porão da viagem. Apenas as chaminés dos navios voam e sussurram o nome que te dei. Quando um candeeiro de vento iluminou o barco que levava o último acorde dos violinos nas fendas da pele. Lembras-te, amor, quando guardaste o trigo no intervalo do tempo? Tão belo era o desenho do corpo no campo entregue à aragem, que mostrava a ruga da pausa insistente. Tão belos eram os braços alucinados com a asa sobre as teclas do piano. Emigro para ti rasgado em notas musicais, enquanto os teus braços atravessam o trigo esguio. Há vozes que fogem pelas ranhuras da terra e correm atrás de navios que voam para latitudes a sul. Como é bela a contemplação da viagem. Aqui o campo é o intervalo entre as fronteiras da minha condição, e as partituras entoam espasmos que rebentam no centro da pedra, enquanto os soluços crescem tanto que me recolhem e me devolvem à caligrafia dos pássaros. Com ela parto para o avesso desta fortuna. Muito obrigada, Denise. Obrigada, Denise. E agora, de um livro seguinte, que foi escrito em pleno tempo de pandemia, escrevi com o poeta Henrique Levy. Eu escrevi metade do livro, ele escreveu a outra metade, chama-se Estado de Emergência, e eu vou ler um poema que tem muito a ver com a minha ligação à natureza. Acontece esta sede das manhãs no pomar, altiva, sobe a tarde num punhado de laranjas. Acontece esta nesga de claridade no circular assento de um nome, onde pousa a vigília do dia, e a nota musical de um ramo de girassóis pousados no vento. Secreta, uma árvore pendura o tempo nos olhos de uma andorinha. Obrigadíssimo, um grande abraço e muito, muito obrigada por esta oportunidade. Muito obrigada, um grande abraço.
Eu que agradeço, obrigado Ângela e obrigado. A caligrafia dos pássaros ainda está em revisão, a neve interior do Alberto está pronta, mas eu vou parar de vos traduzir porque vocês os dois dão muito trabalho, portanto, porque são tão bons, tão bons, tão bons que a gente assusta-se à procura das palavras certas em inglês, portanto, mas parabéns. Obrigado, obrigadíssimo.
Muito obrigada, Denise, muito obrigada.
And for those of you who were following us and then the laughing part before Angela began to read was because she said she was a little bit late because she was coming from Terceira Island. And as all of you know, I'm partial to Terceira Island. So I said it was okay if she was late. If she was coming from the other part of São Miguel, that would be a problem. But from Terceira Island, she can come. There is a kind of an ongoing rivalry between Terceira and São Miguel. It has been since our great grandparents ever since, and it is taken a different tone now, and it's actually, I think, much healthier than what it was when I was being grown up in the 1960s in Terceira. And Angela is a wonderful poet, and she's just a wonderful creator and very meticulous in her work, and her work has been very hard to translate as well, but a pleasure. And so from Angela, we'll go to Sam Pareda, who I've had the pleasure of translating the other way around, from English to Portuguese. Sam has many books published. Eu vou dizer rapidamente em português. O Sam, portanto, é um dos nossos poetas mais conhecidos no mundo luso-americano. Tem vários livros publicados, incluindo um livro que tem um título sugestivo, portanto, O Casamento dos Portugueses, The Marriage of the Portuguese, e o último livro chama-se True North and Untrue You, que é um livro com uma forte componente de crítica social, o Sam, portanto, é subejamente conhecido, obviamente, no mundo luso-americano. Também tive o prazer já de traduzir alguma poesia do Sam, e será incluída na nova antologia que será bilingue, espero eu que a possamos estar a celebrar daqui a um ano, que se chamará Into the Azorian Sea, algo que vem de um poema da Lara Goulart, e portanto inclui obviamente poetas dos Açores traduzidos para inglês, incluindo alguns poemas novos da Ângela, e poetas de luso-americanos, açoro-americanos para português. Sam Pareda.
Thank you, Denise.
I just said you were a heck of a guy. That's all I said, Sam. Okay.
Well, as long as you're telling the truth, that's fine. I'm going to read two poems. The first one has to do with my grandfather coming to America about the turn of the 20th century. And he came out a few years before my grandmother and their first child, my Aunt Mary. He established himself in California, and he was here during the time of the great San Francisco earthquake. But I really didn't know much about him. He was already long gone by the time I was born. And so I've had to kind of manufacture some things about my grandfather. This is called In California, They Say the Soil Comes in Waves. And it's for Cipriano Pereira. I'm trying to picture my grandfather ordering a Manhattan on the ship over, but nothing jives. This is a picture on the move, success at all cost over a sea that understands itself to be an illusion at best, a desperate oasis directed south of Greenland. My grandfather at odds with himself and what's expected. whose name most of you should know if you've been listening. Cipriano, who doesn't believe a higher power will save him anytime soon, who listens to the wails of the even then great literature he would certainly have read if he'd had the time, like me. When I was a graduate student at the University of Iowa, I was fortunate enough to have been given an undergraduate class to teach. And one of the books I decided to teach, because I thought this is no big deal, was Moby Dick. And that's kind of where that idea of the great literature comes from. My grandfather and my father, for that matter, were working constantly. They didn't know how not to work. They should have consulted me. I could have helped them. Anyway, the second poem deals with the house I grew up in. And it deals with something that goes on here quite a bit, actually. I live in a very small town. It goes on here. The house I grew up in was sold a couple of years ago. I had nothing to do with it. And I taught at a school that was just around the corner from that house. So I would go there and pass by there almost every day. And I'm retired now, but I still drive by there occasionally. And in recent months, I've seen this dramatic change going on. The house was bought by somebody who didn't level it. They kept the basic structure, but they did a lot of rebuilding around it, spent a lot of money on it. And I'm sure they're creating something that will be wonderful for them. But in the process, they destroyed something that was very special to me. So this is a poem called Gentrification. I drove down the old street yesterday, the house I was a boy in, the one I said goodbye to my father in, the one with an apricot tree that rejoiced in the fruit of 1953, the one proudly showing off its antenna from my amateur radio days. That one's now perfectly gone. Someone threw money at the old screen door and presto, like that, in an instant, the Dirt City redevelopment team was out there with their rakes and hoes, spreading their bags of, shall we say, fertilizer around a lingering smattering of dreams. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, they jackhammered the ongoing sets of childhood footprints neatly into a pile of broken cement. The spirituality of it all was devastating. A house pulling off its socks and diving into wilderness again. Thank you very much.
Wow, Sam. Amazing. Thank you so much, Sam. And for those of you who don't know, if you're a friend of Sam on Facebook, one of the treats is looking for his poetry early in the morning with my first cup of coffee. Usually Sam beats me with a poem to the coffee, but and today he wrote a poem called The Occupation that is still up on his Facebook page. So if you are his friend, go look at it. It's an amazing poem. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Mais uma vez, Sam Pareda, poeta luso-americano, e como eu estava a dizer em inglês, o Sam tem o hábito de escrever poesia às tantas da matina, 1, 2, 3 da manhã, e normalmente um dos prazeres, eu também me levanto cedo, é de ligar, ir ao Facebook e ver um dos poemas do Sam publicados, depois ele retira-os mais tarde, e ele tem um poema que foi publicado esta manhã, sobre a guerra, que se chama Ocupação, que é de facto um poema extraordinário. From Sam, we'll go now to Portuguese again and back to the Azores. An Azorean by heart, an Azorean not born there, but certainly an Azorean by heart and knowledge. Also, we were just talking about the concept of Azoreanness and how he understands it better than some of us who were born in the islands. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Aníbal Pires, who will be reading his poems in Portuguese.
Olá a todos, uma vez mais. Quero agradecer ao Diniz o privilégio que me proporciona por estar entre tão ilustres personalidades, tão ilustres poetas. É de facto uma honra muito grande para mim. E eu vou-vos ler dois poemas que têm a ver com os Açores, que, como o Diniz disse, é a terra do meu coração. Infelizmente não tenho nenhum poema da terceira, Diniz. É uma falha, mas pode ser que um dia destes...
Na realidade é. Mas a tua poesia é tão boa que a gente desculpa.
Vamos lá então. Ilha Maior. Ilha de néctares, pedras negras e vinhedos a sazonar nos corrais. Ilha de navegadores genuínos, de cardeais da literatura e da fé, de homens, agricultores, baleeiros e construtores de letras imperecíveis como a lava que os pariu. Ilha de gestas historiadas no recato da calheta de Nesquim, remanso inspirador na toada do mar e da terra, melopeia que só os ilhéus alcançam, num foro ímpar da telúrica natureza. Ilha do cais da saudade, de partida e de chegada, de um povo moldado no sonho de partir, querendo ficar, no resguardo da montanha, sensual e maternal, majestosa, presente em cada rincão da ilha, ao alcance de um olhar. Ilha majestosa e presente para os que ficaram. Ilha majestosa e presente para os que procuraram o sonho para lá do horizonte. Ilha de mistérios. Ilha maior. E agora vamos dar um saltinho à Graciosa.
Isso foi mesmo de propósito, para passares por cima da terceira.
Sabem que dos poemas que eu tenho publicados, dos que mais gosto, acabaram por ser escritos na Graciosa. E este que eu vou ler tem a ver com a Graciosa e foi escrito na noite em que, enfim, numa noite na Graciosa, depois de, e vocês vão perceber, de ter estado num local da Graciosa. Folga na Graciosa. Folga não é folguedo, é lugar na Graciosa, é molho a pescador, é São Jorge, o Pico e o Faial. Além, tão perto e tão longe, iluminados pela claridade suave deste ocaso e pelo olhar bárbaro de uns olhos verdes para onde o acaso me guiou. E somos nós, ilhéus atlantes e este mar, a viver o tempo, neste lugar, neste instante. E o mar presente, o mar imenso, este mar de abaladas e regressos, este mar de saudades. Saudade que nem sempre é dor, mas é sempre, sempre amor. Muito obrigado.
Muito bem. Obrigado, Aníbal. Obrigado pela tua poesia e obrigado por teres partilhado connosco neste dia especial. Thanks to Aníbal Pires, who, as you heard, 2 poems, one about the island of San Miguel, one about the island of Graciosa, and he shares a very special love with this archipelago, whom he has served also as a public servant, and very, very well. And so we will go now to English, and we will go to Scott Edward Henderson. And Scott has just published a new book. We actually presented the book here just a few weeks ago through PBBI, an event that we had online. Unfortunately, we cannot have things still in person at the university, but hopefully in the fall we will. And it's Wine Dark Sea, as it was stated by Angela. And so congratulations, Scott, on your new book. And thanks again for taking time to be with us this afternoon.
Of course, muito obrigado, Denise, pelo convite. Boa tarde a todos. Agora tenho de falar inglês, pois é mais fácil para mim. Desculpe. So I'm going to read a poem that I translated of Angela's, as was mentioned earlier. This is from the Calligraphy of Birds, and which, Angela, we may want to work on the whole translation of the entire book at some point. I think would be a good idea. So this is from my new book, Wine Dark Sea, which we presented last week. Actually, Denise, I know you are so busy that the weeks just blur together because you're nonstop working, but you need to take some lessons from Sam. This is this is from the Calligraphy of Birds, and it was dedicated to Ricardo Reis, the heteronym, one of the heteronyms of Pessoa. So this is my translation of Angela's poem or section. Let us start the day in the east by the ravines, with our hands enfolded in rings of water, and look at the blue satin blanket, and let us stay absorbed and free and suspended, and with our hands enfolded in rings of water, let us simply embrace each other and continue to look at the blue satin blanket, as if time were this moment, so smooth and astonished. And in the end, let's not embrace, but simply look at the trickle of water on the skin of this different day, and stay like this, contemplative and absorbed, while the water flows and never dies. And the second poem that I'd like to read is a poem that I wrote in the voice of Cândido Rondon, who was an explorer, scientist, biologist, who took Theodore Roosevelt down what was then called the River of Doubt, from its headwaters to the Amazon in 1913, 1914. So this is written several years, as if Cândido Rondon was remembering Teddy Roosevelt. That's actually the title. Several years after the Roosevelt-Rondon expedition of 1913, 1914. When Roosevelt joined our expedition to explore the River of Doubt from its headwaters to the Amazon, I had my doubts about him too, despite his reputation as a rugged conservationist. He seemed frailer than expected. When he got caught on a rock, securing 2 boats in the rapids, it took him down swiftly. He became feverish and delirious, endlessly repeating, "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan," as if his own pleasure dome was there on the edge of some sunless sea. Then his son Kermit and our physician told me Roosevelt still had a bullet lodged in his chest. He'd been shot while making a speech months back. Spoke for 90 minutes. He never complained. Our heavy dugout canoes no match for the river's rapids and rocks. We lost time with every lost boat, Still, we drove on, determined. He insisted I call him Teodoro, as Roosevelt was difficult for my Brazilian tongue. We feared his loss every day. When we made it to the confluence, he asked to be roused and positioned so as to see the Amazon with his own eyes, so there could be no more doubt. We renamed Rio da Duvida after him, Rio Roosevelt, although to me, it will always be Rio Teodoro. Thank you.
Magnificent and wonderful translation as well. Magnificent. And again, Scott's new book, Wine and Dark Sea. Thank you so much, Scott. And we are going to continue in English because we had, by the way, excuse me, we had Luisa Ribeiro, who was invited from the city of Angra in Terceira Island, but due to her health, she could not be present today. And Vera Duarte from Cabo Verde is extremely busy preparing a book presentation very soon in Lisbon, and she has promised us that we're going to do actually something with the Portuguese poets in African countries with Vera and a couple other poets in the near future. So we thank her also for her willingness to be with us, but couldn't make it today. And we wish Louisa that her health returns quickly. Happy and I mean a rapid and a speedy and obviously total recovery. And so we will go to Sharon Coleman, who I personally discovered last year, and who has you just fall in love with her poetry because she's a very, very powerful poet, just like all of you are. And she's been doing great work up in the Berkeley area. And we thank Sharon also because I know she's busy between teaching and her work with poetry and her creation and her creativity and everything that she does to promote poetry, for taking time to be with us. I appreciate it very, very much. Sharon Coleman. Eu quero dizer duas palavras em português. Portanto, a Sharon é do norte da Califórnia, portanto tem raízes no arquipélago dos Açores. Ela tem publicado em vários jornais, várias revistas literárias. É uma poeta de extraordinária qualidade, como todos aqui presentes, e tive o privilégio de descobrir a poesia da Sharon o ano passado e de ficar encantado com a sua criatividade. Sharon Coleman.
Thank you so much for inviting me. My family came from the Azores in the 1850s, from São Jorge. This was a time when most of the immigrants were illiterate, which was the case with my family. And this first poem is about that, and it's about when I dropped out of college. And thinking about that, I found my great-great-grandfather's deed to his land grant in California. And we looked at it and we were amazed by the beautiful scrawling letters and all the signing and all of it. And then underneath all of that beautiful calligraphy was a shaky X where he actually signed. So here's my first poem, and it's a long poem. So cursive. The V of my legs over the black seat of his Yamaha doubles the V of his legs as tires grip asphalt, pull us forward, leave behind an almost 100-year-old apartment house built for survivors of the quake. Next to a used Cadillac dealership, we weave through the downtown past droves of high school students, a circle of homelessness, scattered office workers, city traffic, and leave behind the grid of city flats to snake up hills. He pulls to the corner where he took a spill a week before in January rain, and I feel asphalt steamy in winter sun, close to bone-breaking acceleration that leaves behind my signature on withdrawal papers. He says, this is more real than the classes I dropped. I no longer trusted the words I couldn't even put onto paper. I didn't believe him. Yet I tightened my thighs around the cycle as it grips the road and jets us forward, now past Spanish-style homes behind wild landscapes, dripping leaves, past eucalyptus shedding swaths of bark and scented oxygen, threatening to fall from the rain-loosened soil beneath shallow roots. The steep climb evens out at the road along the hill's ridge, below squares of metal and glass. Bay waters beyond reflect strewn specks of afternoon sun. Past us, 4 Hell's Angels, their red-brown hair streaming. We turn into the forest where the road twists through evergreens, sometimes a skeletal winter branch that drips darkness, cold for lips underneath the helmet's mask. We then dip forward towards the hill's eastern slope, a valley dotted by oaks. Here we stop, walk out to a stretch of low hills, tall grass, mud firm under our steps. I look further eastward over round hills tinged pink in diminishing light to where my great-great-grandfather, Lavera, signed an X under his name for a farm in the shadows of Mount Diablo. I look into dusk of gnarled branches, brown against gray, then black against dark blue. Oaken cursive arms to climb into and lay my body until flesh and bone marry the living wood, and exile soaks into roots, then soil below. We walk back, pull helmets tight over our heads. The cycle's light beams pass between dark trees, small glimpses like a reverse riding over roads and leaves. Alone at midnight and blanketed by darkness, I'll pour this writing into notebooks, not to be opened again for years. Ink of heartless words, half understood, soaks into pages now bathed by slits of light through the apartment blinds from the dealership spotlights below, while a man who walks the streets screams curses into his night. And thank you. And the next poem is not as long, and it's called Pangea. This is the supposed one continent through which divided to make all the different continents on Earth. So, Pangea. Before radiation conjoined continents, in those windy days by the Pacific, when we went to empty our hands of grades, bills, unpaid work, we stood separate, cold, a cherished forgetting, something immense, something distant. We held our smallness in check. We held hands, maybe, maybe not. I walked in circles around beaches and hills, thought of a last name of my migrant ancestors I might take if we marry. You stood with the vision of waves. When contaminated clouds circled our planet, my nephew touched a rain puddle for the first time. He looked into it, his face. You stood, I walked in circles, rain came down, milk was measured, scientists bartered plausible pathologies for wave-swept birds. I told my nephew's parents to take him in. They laughed as he splashed his watery likeness. We held hands, maybe, and walked inside. At night, it was almost Eden. Nothing more to desire, not even knowledge, because that we almost had. We became both continent and sea. Now a motorcycle from Japan washes up on shore. I close my eyes and a seal with the last name of my migrant ancestors swims by. Radiation burns across its body. I didn't take that name. I didn't take yours. In this bed, though, we don't practice being together because we are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you. Wonderful poems. Thank you all. With that, we're going to conclude this first session. Just a reminder that we do have a session for those of you who'd like to attend later on this evening between 5 and 6 with another 11 voices, this time all of them from the United States, different coasts of the US. I want to thank all of you, obviously Scott, Nancy, Sharon, Alberto, Aníbal, Lara, and Sam, Decca, Angela, everybody for being here. Your poetry is inspiring, your work is inspiring. There's lots of different themes that run between your poetry, which is amazing because you are all writing in different parts of the world, but the theme of nature, for example, is there in many of your poems, whether that is in mainland Portugal or the Azores or California or the East Coast. And so best of luck. I know that some of you are working on books, on new books. I want to, of course, thank Sam for waking me up every morning at 4 o'clock with a poem, because it is a treat. And I want to thank all of you for all of your work and for your generosity with always having time for the PBBI events. We look forward to the day that we can bring, if not all of you, at least some of you together here at Fresno. It's not that bad of a place. I mean, you know, the Central Valley is okay, as Sam can tell you. And so thank you all. And I know that Lara is going to be reading. I don't know if any of you have any announcements that you'd like to make. We'd more than happy to make them at this time. I know Lara is going to be reading on April the 2nd. Correct me if I'm wrong, slap me if I'm wrong. But I believe it is April the 2nd at the Carnegie Arts Center in Turlock. She's going to be reading with someone else, another lady by the name of Elizabeth, I think, Souza. Whom I have never met, but we will hear for the first time, and that is right, Lara. It is on the 2nd, correct?
It is on the 2nd, and it's someone else that I'm reading with.
Okay.
Couto. I think it's Couto, and I can't remember.
Couto, yes, yeah. I think Elizabeth Couto, yes, indeed, okay. Elizabeth, I think it was. And you're reading on the 2nd at the Carnegie Arts Center, correct?
At 2 p.m. and anybody in the area, come, please. It's going to be geared towards the Central Valley, Portuguese, etc. So
yeah, it's
they have an exhibit. They have an exhibit of the Festa there.
That's right, the book Festa that you have one of your poems included, and so there is an exhibit on the Portuguese in the Valley and throughout the state of California. Actually, it's called Festa, a Celebration of Faith. And
right.
So, any other announcements that any of you are going to be reading or have anything coming up publishing real quick? I know that, as I said, Scott just published his book, and any other announcements? And Alberto has a new book, Echocardiograma, coming soon. That was
Eu estou a publicar, possivelmente vou publicar até ao final do ano também, que está em revisão.
Muito bem. Tens títulos já ou é surpresa? Fica surpresa?
Não é surpresa, estou entre duas hipóteses.
Muito bem. Portanto, continuo. Poesia, claro.
Poesia, sim, sim.
Muito bem.
Poesia, mas olha, aproveito para dizer, mas isso faz parte, isso agora que eu vou dizer faz parte do meu trabalho. Estou neste momento, estou a trabalhar, já vou para o 3º ano, numa antologia de poesia açoriana, portanto, que pretende atualizar, depois do Rui Galvão de Carvalho e do Pedro da Silveira, do trabalho que eles fizeram, atualizar naturalmente, porque o Pedro da Silveira, a antologia dele é de final dos anos 70, 79, salvo erro, e nessa antologia vão estar incluídos naturalmente estes nossos autores, estes nossos poetas que estivemos aqui a ouvir hoje, os que escrevem em língua portuguesa. Portanto, vamos ver como é que vamos fazer isto, porque eu estive a ouvir aqui em inglês também. Pronto, mas depois eu falo contigo sobre isto, Inês, está bem? Falo contigo sobre isto.
So I hope all of you understood. Angela is working, well, she has a book coming out, her own book later on this year, but she's working on an anthology, which is needed in the Azores of Portuguese poetry, of Azorean poetry. There's been a couple of anthologies done, Pedro Silveira, the most notable one, but there's been others, as she said, but it's been a while, and she has discovered poets that no one else has discovered from her work, of her research that she has been doing for the last 3 years on this anthology. And so it's important work that's coming out hopefully soon, but she does have a book coming out. Anyone else, any other announcements, any other books? I know Alberto, as I said, has his coming out. And if you read poetry, please read Alberto's new book. If you read Portuguese, read his new book. If you don't read Portuguese, teach yourself Portuguese to learn the new book, to read the new book, because I'm sure it's going to be translated, but it is amazing in the original language, obviously, as yours is in English. Those of you who write in English, it's always hard to translate something and to get that meaning. It's always a reinterpretation. It's never a translation, because sometimes you try the best you can, but there are certain words, and there's certain words now used just right now by Sharon that I was thinking, how would I translate this to Portuguese? So it's and all of you. So it's hard, but kudos to all of you again. Congratulations, and a million thanks. Unless there are any other announcements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy World Poetry Day. O mundo é bocadinho melhor, ou bastante melhor, graças a todos vós. The world's a much better place thanks to all of you. Thank you so much.
Foi muito bom, foi muito bom.
Obrigada. Muito obrigado.
Muito
obrigado. Boa tarde. Muito obrigado.
Deus.
Beijos,
Obrigado.
beijos e abraços para todos. Muito obrigado. Thank you so much.